All right, a very good morning to everybody. I hope you're keeping well and that your families are well as well. Welcome to today's session on the CEO imperative, how today's leaders can realize tomorrow's opportunity. So I'm going to ask my panelists to turn on their videos so that we can begin the session. Anthony? All right, great. As we begin, as usual, a few housekeeping rules. You will have your video and your audio turned off for this session. If you have any questions, please submit them in the Q&A tab or the chat tab as the session progresses. In terms of run of show, we will have the two speakers from EY make the presentation. They'll run through their presentation in its entirety. And then after that, we will have a Q&A session. So please, as we progress, if questions come up, do submit them in the Q&A tab so that it's easy for us to track. I know I did mention Q&A and the chat tab, but please use the Q&A tab. It makes it easier for us to track your questions. So my name is Maxwell Okello. I'm the Chief Executive of the American Chamber of Commerce, for those who may not know me. We're really excited to be hosting this forum this morning in partnership with EY, which is one of the leading consulting firms in the region. And they are going to present to us their findings on the third CEO imperative study created by their think tank. It's called EYQ. The study is based on a global survey of over 300 chief executives of Forbes Global 2000 companies to understand their perspectives on what will constitute the future enterprise. And as you may agree with us, this is a timely discussion. The world, as we know, changed significantly in 2020, forcing business to innovate how we work, how we engage, and in addition, also change consumer trends and behavior. And this is just the beginning of what we see as a greater transformation to come. So today's session aims to bring the findings of this report, paint a picture of what business leaders can expect and how they can prepare for it. We'll cover two broad areas. One is the how of transformation, so a glimpse of what leaders view as the drivers of change in the organizations and the transformation. And then secondly, the first one is the what, then secondly is the how of transformation. How do we overcome, how do we react, how do we ensure that we're able to realize the transformation that is definitely part of our lives as we move on. So we are pleased to have with us today two gentlemen from EY to lead this conversation. We have Frank Mwiti, who's the East Africa Markets Leader. Frank, if you could just wave to the audience. Thank you. And we have Anthony Muthusi, who's the East Africa Consulting Leader. So I'll just quickly give a brief bio of both, and then I'll hand over to Frank to get us going. So Frank Mwiti is EY's East Africa Markets Leader. He manages and drives the strategic development of EY's consulting, transactions, assurance, and tax services across Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, and Ethiopia. He's the global client service partner for several multinational accounts across Africa, and is the chair of EY's Accelerating Environmental Sustainability Sustainability Africa Board. He has 20 plus years of professional experience, including 15 of those in London, in investment banking and management consulting, where he advises investors, shareholders, and boards, and including government executives across Africa, UK, US, Europe, and Russia. Frank's expertise is in strategy, M&A, and governance. He is a CPA, has a law degree, and holds executive management qualifications from MIT in the US, University of California, and the General Assembly in the UK. And secondly, we have Anthony Muthusi. Anthony leads EY's consulting practice in East Africa and is a board member at Endeavour and also the British Chamber of Commerce. He has 20 plus years of management consulting experience, having worked across business transformation restructuring, turnaround planning, mergers and acquisition, financial due diligence, business valuation, and private equity advisory. He has an MBA from the Warwick Business School in the UK and a Bachelor of Commerce degree from the University of Nairobi, and is a certified public accountant of Kenya. Anthony is passionate about building a better working world by transforming businesses through the power of people, technology, and innovation. So with that brief introduction, I want to hand over to Frank. Frank, the mic is yours.
Thank you, Maxwell, and pleasure to be here. Anthony and I are looking forward to a very interactive session with members of Kenya, and of course, we also
Frank, I think you have a voice issue. We are not hearing you. It's some bits coming on and off.
Okay. Maybe for bandwidth, I'll go off video.
Okay, please proceed.
Okay. So I was saying we are really grateful to be here and for this opportunity. Should my voice not be clear, Anthony, let me know, then you can pick up. In the meantime, let me just start by projecting our screen, and then we'll have a conversation with the members here. Max, just confirm you can see my screen.
Yes, you can see your screen. So if you can, just go into slide share mode.
Go.
Yeah, you're good.
So the session really will cover, as Maxwell mentioned, the results of the 2021 EY CEO Imperative Study. This is a study that we do globally every year, and we'll start by giving you context on the survey itself, or the study itself, and then after that also walk you through the specific sessions that are relevant for this audience. We've already introduced ourselves, so I'll skip that. I will just start by mentioning that there are 5 sessions that we've distilled this survey into. As you can see on the screen, we have divergence, which I will cover, new risk-taking and growth, which I will also cover, and then Anthony will pick up transformation. I will then support him on intention versus execution, and Anthony will finish off on the DNA of the future enterprise, after which we'll then have Q&A. So I'll start by giving you context of the study itself. This screen here summarizes the opening remarks from Maxwell that highlights that the study has 2 parts. The first part focusing on the what of transformation, more specifically, the CEO's views on what's driving change in the organization, their transformation objectives and capability gaps, the likelihood of different business scenarios, and what will comprise the DNA of the future enterprise. And the second part focuses on the how of transformation, specifically how to overcome organization gaps that to realize transformation objectives, and also, of course, focusing on long-term value creation. We'll unpack both parts as part of this conversation. The study itself received views from over 300 global CEOs. Those CEOs have a footprint across Americas, Europe, Middle East, India, Africa, and Asia Pacific. And it also picked up a good chunk of both public and private companies, and of course, a fairly good spectrum of companies by revenue size, all the way from those with about $1 billion of revenue, and of course, beyond that. So you speaking from an East Africa perspective, I think we should feel comfortable that these views did actually pick up our colleagues in the African continent. And of course, that was also taken into account when we were doing our survey of the specific CEOs. So that gives you a context of really the lay of the land of the 200 companies and the CEOs that were surveyed as part of that. So on that note, I will start off on divergence as the first theme. And no surprises there that the survey really did show that there's a wide gap that's opening up between companies that were thriving in the past, in the last 3 years, and that are see themselves as thriving in the next 3 years, versus those that were surviving. And when we're having this conversation, we'll also share with you insights on what surviving companies are doing versus what thriving companies are doing, and therefore, what are some of the transformational lessons to pick up there if you want to pivot from being a surviving company into a thriving company. One of the points I would want to draw on this list, on this screen, your attention on this screen is on figure 2 on the right of the screen. It does actually already start emphasizing the concept of transformation or the theme of transformation. And we are finding that thriving companies are actually accelerating their transformation agenda. And we'll also cover how they say they are doing that. While surviving companies have slowed on their transformation agenda. And as we go into the next slide, you will see that part of the reason for that is refocusing on survival, as it were, and we'll touch on that. But the key takeaway here is that we found companies that were doing where revenues were growing in the previous 3 years are actually going to grow even faster in the next 3 years. So looking out past 2020, and more importantly, those that were not growing in the last 3 years appear to be even growing at a lesser pace going forward. And we will unpack part of that as part of this conversation. The next slide re-emphasizes that thriving companies are focusing on building for the future, while surviving companies are protecting what they have. They've gone into survival mode, so to speak. On the left, you can see that thriving companies are more focused on pursuing growth. They are, for example, 38% of them are picking up greater change, significant change in product and service mix, either, for example, because they have identified new ways of servicing clients, new market segments, new opportunities for growth. They are also surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, depending on where you sit, actually adding headcount. They are growing their recruitment efforts. They are adding more talent. While surviving companies, 3% are focusing on recruiting. In any event, most of those surviving companies are actually laying people off. You may have seen some of those headlines even in our local market. One may ask, why are thriving companies actually adding or rather increasing headcount? And part of the reason really would be that if you are actually identifying new opportunities, if you are seeing new ways of servicing clients, you will need more talent to actually drive that. So the two go together. We are also seeing thriving companies engaging in major or planning to engage in major mergers and acquisitions. So inorganic growth, buying new entities, entering new markets by acquisitions, entering new market segments by acquisition. We are seeing more of that even in our local market here, particularly in tech, financial services, and consumer space. And you can also see there that surviving companies on the mergers and acquisition side, fewer and fewer of them, less than 5%, are actually in the process of doing any mergers or acquisitions. On the right side, we are saying surviving companies are more focused on reducing spend, cost cutting. 71% of them do not plan to start any comprehensive transformation initiative. 71% are focused on cost reduction. 22% of them are focused on reducing headcount, and that 7% of them, compared to 79%, are spending more on transformation. So if you look at the key takeaway from this slide is that for thriving companies, the focus on growth is literally changing the DNA of the business or of the organization. It's repositioned the priorities of both the board and the C-suite and the CEO in particular. And even more importantly, part of this is going to drive even a bigger gap between the thriving companies and surviving companies. And when we talk about the DNA of the future enterprise, you will see some of these themes featuring through and coming through to really inform how companies of the future, organizations of the future, ought to be positioning themselves now and managing themselves. And then the next session picks up on risk-taking and growth. In other words, how are CEOs seeing growth and how are they balancing that with the risk? What we found is, in fact, CEOs, particularly CEOs of thriving companies, are very, very focused on new risk-taking, new being a key word there. And of course, echoing the previous slide, there is new investment going into growth and transformation. Majority of the CEOs anticipate actions in the next 12 months to progress that transformation. So in your own organizations, if transformation and proper strategic transformation and conversations around how to unlock transformation and make it work are not happening, then probably that ought to be happening right now. And Anthony will unpack that a bit more. 68% of the over 300 CEOs that were responded to these surveys said they plan a major investment in data and technology. We'll touch on data in the subsequent sessions. 61% of CEOs plan to undertake a major new transformation initiative. Question there becomes, what are the other 39% thinking, or why are the other 39% not thinking or planning to undertake a major transformation initiative? That, of course, puts into question potentially how they will continue to drive, if at all, in the future. 5% of those CEOs expect to spend more on transformation over the next 3 years compared to last year. In other words, they were still spending on transformation in the last 3 years. They are planning to spend even more in the next 3 years. Again, transformation being a key theme from this session. And then, of course, surprise, surprise, 22% of the CEOs say the investment in transformation will be paid for partly, of course, by the cost reductions, as we saw in the previous slide, where there is some aspect of cost reduction as part of the CEO agenda. For me, the biggest takeaway from this is actually the bottom right, the 46% one, which says CEOs, 46% of CEOs have investor support to make strategic investment, even if that decision means there will be a reduction in near-term earnings per shares and dividends. That's a fundamental point, because it means investors, shareholders, and the other stakeholders are saying, we need to actually do this if we have to protect our earnings going forward. In other words, we are willing to forego that opportunity now to earn the benefits of the strategic investment we make now. So that, for me, sitting from where we sit at EY, it's a fundamental point, because we've seen in the past where CEOs have not gotten sponsorship from the investors or shareholders to actually make what of course are, in my view, obvious strategic investments to build value in the business going forward. So we are seeing that globally, at least based on this survey, now almost 50% of CEOs are saying, actually, come around. Investors see the need for this and the supporters. Again, that should inform some of the conversations you're already having in your various organizations. And then I will pass to Anthony to take us through transformation. Anthony?
Thank you very much, Frank, and good morning to everyone. Apologies, I've had to put off my video. Zoom, I tend to struggle with Zoom most of the time, so that's why I'm connected on two options there. Just to start us off, I think the conversation with the CEOs was just around how have they fared well, how have they fared during the COVID disruption, what have they seen? And obviously, as Frank has already talked to us about, obviously there are clear winners, and those are the ones that we're talking about as thriving businesses, and obviously there are businesses that are under pressure, and obviously there will be clear losers here. And in speaking to them, we came up with about a couple of transformation drivers. And obviously, as you can see on that slide, the most popular one, and which most CEOs, and I would imagine even most of you are already thinking about this, the most popular driver of transformation that CEOs are investing in is tech and digital innovation. And this is obviously not a surprise given the restrictions that came with by companies that figure out how are they gonna ensure that their employees continue working remotely from home. How are they gonna reach their customers, and what are the customers doing? And in that process, obviously, tech is one of the key differentiators in terms of how you transform, how you access your customers, and how your employees work and access the work areas, given the challenge that obviously came across. We are now beginning to see that in organizations like ours, we speak to our employees, people will continue preferring to work in online, and also even in some cases, even as some businesses try and get back to office, there'll be those issues of what's then just excuse me just a little bit. Yeah, that's fine. So there'll be those issues around then. How do you continue really getting ahead of your competition in terms of your customer? And that obviously ended up being the second value driver, that transformation driver that most CEOs seem to have been focusing on. How do you get close to the customer? How do you understand what they're thinking? How do you really improve on the experiences of your services or products? And you'll see most of the companies that actually focus on the customer expectations, the key driver of transformation, are the ones that are retail or customer facing, finance, consumer, and elements of manufacturing. Obviously, huge utilities like energy, who tend to be either B2B or monopolistic in nature, they didn't seem to consider that as a key area of transformation. And if you look at that, it varied from sector to sector. Of course, of interest is energy when it comes to the issue of climate and sustainability. And in our last conversation we had with a group of CEOs like yourselves, there were questions around then, why is finance not focusing on sustainability? What are the issues? Are CEOs seeing that as an area of transformation in these other segments? Of course, with energy standing out because the issue of pollution, the issue of geopolitics is quite big in the energy sector. When you think about whether it's oil and gas or whether it's power, whether it's green energy, there's quite a lot of debate around sustainability in that area. Obviously, new models. How do you pivot your business? If your business was heavily leaning on face-to-face interaction with the customers, and customers are beginning to prefer online, how do you reinvent your business model to suit the new emerging behaviors in your customers, et cetera, et cetera. So obviously, these are areas obviously you may want to consider in your own businesses. These are many. I don't think most CEOs will try and pull all these levers at one go, but obviously the first two are quite of interest in terms of trying to differentiate your business by investing in the right tech and driving digital innovation, and obviously trying to figure out how you can stay ahead and get closer to your customers. Frank, you move to the next slide, please. Obviously, the priorities, again, the message is coming from our conversation with the CEOs was the biggest priority is getting the organization more agile. Obviously, the COVID and the containment measures that came across that and the disruptions across supply chains obviously meant that organization had become more agile. The organizations that are actually thriving and the ones that are emerging as winners are the ones that proved to be the most agile, the ones that could pivot, move employees into remote working, get productivity up with those employees, remain compassionate and around the well-being of their customers and their employees, et cetera, et cetera. So those are key priority area. And obviously customer connectivity, which I've talked about, the organizations that get closest to the customers, the organizations that are able to get deep insights about what their customers are thinking, that the organizations that are also able to influence customer behavior obviously will obviously emerge as winners. And the debate of long-term value has obviously come back. It was there for a while, and I think with the shocks that came with the last recession around 2012, 2008, and obviously now with COVID coming back, the issue of building organizations that create long-term value is critical. And by long-term value is what this means is trying to focus to generate value beyond just shareholders, trying to ensure that the organization works for all stakeholders, be it your customers on a long-term basis, whether it's your employees on a long-term basis, whether it's the communities which you operate in and obviously the environment and the connectivity factors around your communities, making sure that you've got a balanced approach and a very long-term view in terms of how you structure your business and how you motivate your employees to focus on growth. So I was not surprised when I saw that risk management was one of the biggest areas of focus from CEOs. And I would imagine this, having seen the kind of shocks that businesses went through starting March of last year into some time in September of last year, and everybody ran back into about conserving cash, trying to protect the business, and obviously there were surprises, especially where your business wasn't resilient or wasn't agile enough. So risk management has obviously emerged as one key area of focus. I would be surprised that that's the same for organizations. The other obviously important areas that the CEOs talked about in terms of focus, and I've spoken to this, is about product and service portfolio. How do you get insights about your customers? How do you drive personalization of your products and services to your customers? How do you create ecosystems that allow people to thrive, drive loyalty, increase customer value? And more importantly, how do you start pivoting yourself from product services to experiences? And that is key as you move into the future. The issue of innovation is important. How do you get ideas generated in your organization? How do you move with speed around this idea generation? And even how do you inspire the organization to start moving to a point where you've got customer focused or customer sourced innovation? You're innovating to solve customer problems, and whether not trying to solve imagined or problems that you think are prioritized, is more of getting the customers to work with you in your innovation journey. And finally, all this is not achievable if you don't focus on people and talent. And the world is changing very quickly. Business models are changing, which means you can't fire everybody in the organization. But what is critical is then how do you empower and encourage your existing resources to really upskill, get new skills, focus on new markets, know what is important in those new markets. How do you incentivize them and make sure they are measured to drive what is important from business transformation or the objective of your business? And even more importantly, when you talk about long-term value, how do you really come back and incentivize the entire workforce to something a bit more long-term as opposed to short-term? And ultimately, given the issues that have emerged around health and well-being, and the surprises that even most organizations like ours have faced during this time of lockdown and containment measures, the issue of mental health is big among employees. And how do you really get back and invest in the well-being of your employees and focus on that? Because there are, from our own lessons, that people have adjusted differently to this. So some people live alone, and the measures that came as a result of COVID created a lot of loneliness, mental health issues, challenges. Others live in very difficult environments with young siblings, difficult to work. So quite a bit of pressure. And obviously others who are never used to be in the same space with their spouses, and probably they've struggled to cope with those. So well-being is and remains critical. And the CEOs, obviously, like our own business, brought up this issue of about people and talent and well-being as a critical one. Frank, we'll move on to the next slide. Obviously, not surprised that most of the CEOs focused on people issues. Obviously, they focus on many other things, but obviously what stood out is that at least 68% of them felt that they've got some work to do around the human factor, and how do they drive leadership. The issue of diversity, again, imagine a big way, diversity in leadership, diversity as part of your culture, and obviously diversity in terms of decision making and driving that. So I wonder whether you face the same challenges in your own business as you've tried to reorganize yourselves, and especially for those who have been very successful during this period. What has been the biggest driver? Is it the teams? Is it that you had the right teams in place, the right culture that you already put into place that has really allowed your business to really win in this kind of environment? And for those of us who are still stuck in the mud because probably weren't well placed to serve in this kind of shocks, what do you think has been your biggest impediment? And the human factor, how influential has that been from a culture perspective? Have people rallied behind to try and drive a business, improve performance of the business, or have you found a scenario of it has been difficult to make decisions and you are trapped by legacy issues? You can't move because of legacy factors around how your organization is organized, slow decision-making processes, cultural challenges in terms of people taking ownership and pivoting and acquire new skills. Maybe this is worth debate, but I think for organizations to thrive, the human factor is very, very important. And I think this survey just goes to confirm that aspect. Frank, next slide. So obviously I'll hand over to Frank to talk about the issue of the intention to change your business and the ability to just make sure you execute. Frank, over to you.
Thanks, Anthony. As we get in this session on intention versus, I guess one of the things that's a common thread this from the very beginning was transformation, of course, and then that aspect of people, putting people at the center of this transformation. Touch on that as we go along. So well, part of what the survey showed is that while CEOs have the appetite for transformation, they face significant execution gaps, whether that's in capabilities, focus areas, or in the distance between saying something is a priority and actually doing something about it. So it goes without saying that closing these gaps between intention and execution will be essential to moving from mere intention to actually successful execution. And from the slide, one of the things we did was we asked CEOs to respond to about 39 statements that sought to tease out what they were thinking, both from a societal perspective, the human's perspective, and of course, financial and customer. And then we combined those to come up with a score of intention and action. And those that scored high in terms of that combined intention and action score are the ones in orange, top right, the high long-term value score, and those that had a lower score, the purple ones. I guess the key point here is that focus between what the CEOs are saying they want to do versus actually executing it. And we touch a bit more on that. And before we do that, I think we need to re-emphasize what the market defines long-term value to be, because what we are clearly seeing is that those organizations and those CEOs that are able to close the gap between saying versus doing are best placed to build or create long-term value. So in others, we are saying the survey shows that they definitely creating long-term value is an important cross-cutting priorities, and the way to really see whether there is acceleration towards long-term value creation is to see how is the gap between intention and execution closing. And part of the other thing I think that's worth emphasizing is that the survey shows that there is significant work that remains to be done to reorient companies or reposition companies towards long-term value. It also suggests CEOs are unclear, and probably not just CEOs, goes beyond that. It suggests CEOs are unclear about the definition of long-term value in the first place, and secondly, how to progress to actually achieve long-term value. I should mention that at EY, our long-term value model takes a holistic view of how our business creates value across stakeholders, not simply shareholders. So it encompasses people, customer, society, and of course the financial value, which is a key point as well. So we say creating superior sustainable value today requires driving value across four long-term value dimensions we'll touch on. Those long-term value dimensions, as I said, people, customer, society, financial value. We think those CEOs that seize this moment and make the shift to create value for all stakeholders, not just shareholders, will be those CEOs that are clearly focused on pursuing the goal of closing the gap between saying versus doing. And we will also highlight some of the ways that we think CEOs are approaching that. This slide helps unpack the areas where C-suites are focusing to drive growth. And we've distilled this data by sectors that resonates with the slides that Anthony spoke to previously. You see in the consumer sector, for example, that digital transformation is a key focus area. Overall, it is the biggest focus area for C-suites. I think we can all agree that this aspect of transformation, particularly tech and digital-led transformation, will continue probably to be a key focus area for driving growth. To the extent that your organization is not, doing more around this, then probably there is a bigger gap compared to your peers between saying and doing. You can see the other bit I would want to pick up, for example, is in the energy sector, for example, you can see geopolitical risk and climate risk are a big focus area. I think no surprises there. There's a lot of dislocation and other, shall we say, uncertainties around the energy sector, both from the traditional risk factors in producers and consumers, but also new forms of energy. I think no surprises there. For me, what was surprising, and perhaps it might come through in the Q&A, is that companies in tech and finance, for example, seem to think that geopolitical risk and climate risk is not a big deal, shall we say, and not necessarily a big focus area for C-suite. I suspect going forward, as we do more of this service, say for example next year and beyond, I think a lot of these, some of these factors or focus areas will evolve. I think there's quite a bit of geopolitical risk, for example, coming into the technology space. I think you are aware as an example. I also think that aspects of disruptive innovation in whatever context will weigh up in future. But I guess the key takeaway here is that digital transformation is definitely up there. Long-term value is up there, and I've mentioned the way we as EY value, or rather define long-term value in the context of closing the gap between saying and doing. I guess before moving on, one of the things that is important to highlight is that the last three bottom, the last two aspect of C-suite focus, behavioral science and quantum computing. Perhaps in our part of the world, say let's start with quantum computing. In our part of the world, it may well be that we probably are not necessarily seeing that as a big focus area for C-suites, but we know based on conversations with some of our clients, in specific clients, they are already adopting or at least planning to focus on some of these newer emerging technology areas. Behavioral science is not a surprise for us. I think I've seen it from an EY perspective. When we discuss when we have these conversations with C-suites and other stakeholders, a lot of them tell us, if you're in business, you're in the behavior business, and that means you need to really understand how customers behave, how customers want to be served, how customers want to interact with your business, how your suppliers want to interact with your business, how your regulators want to interact with your business, how your competitors are interacting with you in the market. And that will then inform some of the newer talent and newer way of thinking that will probably brought to bear by these newer areas of focus, for example. Perhaps that also explains why aspects of disruptive innovation and AI and data science are a key point of focus for C-suite. Key takeaway is digital transformation is up there, followed by long-term value. And we think that will continue to be the case for the foreseeable future. And of course, for the audience, the question becomes, in your organizations, how are you actually rolling out digital transformation? Who's responsible for it? Who's sponsoring it? How are you measuring the success of it? Similarly, in your organization, how are you defining long-term value? How are you documenting and tracking saying versus doing? And of course, more importantly, what's happening in your market from a long-term value creation that you can learn, and then of course bring the good lessons. I will also highlight a key point around data. I think without belaboring the point, everyone now hopefully agrees that this new asset called data is absolutely a mission critical asset for any organization. And from the survey, I think one of the things we were finding out is that everyone knows data is a key issue, and it's a key point. And perhaps the issue is not whether really there is that realization that data is a key issue. Rather, it is how do you unlock value out of the data that you have custody over. More importantly, how do you actually make that a business as usual way of working in your organization? For me, one of the things that came out of this survey that I would like to particularly focus on is the bottom portion of it, the 34% in purple there, that shows that actually one of the key challenges around data continues to be how to make sure customers trust us with their data. That's a fundamental point. You've seen even new legislation coming into play in our own market around data protection, data privacy, and all that. You've seen also, of course, incidents around data management, both in our markets and in other markets. I guess the point is, it is a huge asset for everybody, but how do you, as a CEO or indeed as a member of any organization, how do you create the right culture in your organization to realize the full potential of that data, to ensure, for example, you get the right data insights that contribute to better outcomes for your customers and for your employees. You use that data to do better risk management. You use that data to really bring the human at the center of your transformation agenda. And Anthony will touch on that when he's talking about the future DNA of the organization. I guess part of what we should highlight is that while one of the challenges is the data itself and how to manage it, another equally important challenge is how to create the right culture in the company to realize the full potential of data. It's easier said than done. There are conversations on what it means to actually change or create the right culture in the company or in an organization for that matter, and we'll touch to some extent. So when I talk about culture, it can be quite a wide-ranging topic, and I'm personally not an expert on culture itself. But one of the points that came out from this survey was questions being asked on, is it time to appoint a chief culture officer? It may well be that in our lifetime, if not probably in the near future, you might find a new board member or a C-suite member responsible specifically for culture, a CCO, a chief culture officer. I remember back in the days when data was a big deal and everyone was wondering what would be the changes at the C-suite, and now it is normal to have a CDO, a chief data officer. I think we are going into an era where catalyzing transformation requires a chief officer to take responsibility for culture. But while we're on that topic, I think we also align that with conversations that are very, very central to the agendas of most boards and C-suites at the moment, which is around diversity. And what was interesting in the survey is that C-suites were saying that they want to focus more on prioritizing and streamlining decision-making rather than necessarily focusing on the diversity agenda. That's surprising for us because we think diversity is increasingly a very important point, and not just some desktop tick the box type diversity. I think this is in my view, and our report does highlight that we think that's a blind spot for C-suite to think that diversity is not really higher up in the priority list. And we think if we were to do this survey probably in the future, that will change. Suffice it to say that what CEOs highlighted when we were discussing the role of culture in catalyzing transformation, they said decision-making, streamlining decision-making is much more important. Creating new roles to reflect the changes in market imperatives, more important, and then a more horizontal rather than vertical responsibilities compared to focus on diversity and talent. As I said, as EY, we think that's a blind spot, and we think that in all likelihood, this is going to change going forward. And then, of course, there's a question to yourselves where in your organizations, how are you having this conversation about culture and what it means as part and parcel of the transformation agenda in your. On that note, I will hand over to Anthony to finalize for us on the DNA of the future. Anthony?
Thank you, Frank. I'm looking at the watch. I think we've got 12 minutes. So what I'll do, I'll skip a couple of slides here, Frank, so that we can also open up for Q&A. So I think I'll speak to this slide, and the next one is about what from our survey, what is the DNA of the future organization? And to start with, what are the characteristics of an effective CEO? And I think what came out of this one was the issue leads with compassion. This is critical, and I think this is somewhere also as a leader myself, I've had to learn a few things during these tough periods around leading with compassion and also trying and put things into perspective whenever you see your team members struggling, having challenges, just being compassionate, realize that these are not normal times. People are struggling at a personal level. Some people have been hit hard, even at a personal level. Maybe they've lost parents, they've lost spouses, they've lost children. You will never know. So the issue of leading with compassion is imagined as a critical characteristic of an effective leader. And I hope probably as you all reflect around your own leadership, maybe this is something that you can take home and go see whether it's an area worth working on. The issue of setting examples of experiment and taking risk. And I think this goes beyond just setting examples. It's just allowing your employees to experiment. And even when they fail, allowing them to learn from those mistakes, especially those mistakes that are made in good faith and with good intentions. How do you create an organization as a leader that allows people to learn from their mistakes and actually those who have learned from their mistakes are embraced by the organization and encourage that? Culturally, for us, it'll be difficult. We're not like the Americans that have got a very strong culture around. I've learned from my mistakes. I've failed twice. I've failed thrice. We've got a culture of maybe nobody wants to talk about their failures, but it's a critical characteristic of an effective leader. Taking time to think the unthinkable, just getting out of the hustle and bustle of running the business day-to-day meetings and creating that environment of can we think big? What can we do differently and what is doable and just embedding that in your leadership style. The issue of data, Frank spoke about it. How do you start monetizing data in your organization and driving a culture whereby even your front office guys are beginning to lean on the data to make decisions and understand customers and understand the business better. The issue of customer experience. I know most of your CEOs are on the shop floor most of the time talking to the customers. But obviously, that cannot obviously be understated. Frank, if you move on to the next slide, please. So what are the characteristics of the future enterprise? Now, this one I'm talking about the DNA of the future enterprise is about focus on long-term value. This is issue of how do you create an organization that every decision that you make today is really about creating long-term value. That will definitely be a critical DNA for any successful organization. We've spoke about data and technology. How do you bring tech into your business? How do you embed and monetize data? And how do you create trust around even how you use this data from your customers? Talent, I spoke to this, bringing humans to the center of your organization and making sure you are taking care of your talent, enabling them to grow and enabling them to acquire new skills, creating a culture that allows them to really be focused around transformation. The embedding organization into ecosystems. I know historically enterprises used to operate in islands. So if, for example, you're a GE, you felt that I'm the GE of this world, I'm going to operate as an enterprise and everybody else, I'm this big island and I'm extremely important. And what we've learned from what has happened with the increasingly disruption that is coming from tech is how do you as an organization get yourself into ecosystems or value chains. How do you first of all create them? If you are to create the ecosystem, then you're obviously in a very sweet spot. If you can't create the ecosystem, how do you get yourself in a situation where you can actually manage the ecosystem and participate across the entire value as an organization, just embedding your services into those ecosystems and making sure you're creating value across that. But if you cannot manage the ecosystem, then how do you become a critical player in that ecosystem? So it's just about creating ecosystems and participating in those as opposed to creating a standalone enterprise. The issue of sustainability, Frank spoke to this, will remain obviously critical, and obviously disruption, innovation, ideas at speed, that cannot be underemphasized in terms of critical DNAs. I think we'll pause there because we're already at 9:52 there, Frank, and maybe open up this to Q&A. I've seen a couple of questions on the chat. Frank, do you want to lead us with the Q&A, or do we take that back to?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me lead that. So thank you very much, both Frank and Anthony, for what is clearly a very, very enlightening and fascinating study that EY has done. Members, if you have any questions, please just submit them as we move along on the Q&A. And I can see we have 2 questions so far. So the first question, I'll take those. The first question came from Esther Fanning. So she's asking, Easter Fanning, and I'm saying a she, I'm assuming it's a she. Is the information in your presentation today representative of farms in Kenya? And the reason why she's asking this is because farms that are otherwise considered to be thriving, like ABSA, your KCBs, and a few others, turn to cost-cutting measures, such as COVID layoffs, reduced R&D expenditure, and less aggressive marketing, signaling less aggression with regards to the pursuit of growth. Does that then mean that this is an outlier? And Easter has corrected me. It's a he and not a she. So my sincere apologies for that. So Frank, you want to just give a flavor to that?
Sure. Thanks, Maxwell. It's a good question, Easter. There are 3 things probably to just respond very quickly on that. The first bit is to mention that yes, the data is representative of farms in Kenya, of course, in the context of Africa. Let me put it that way, rather than country. But having said that, transformation of itself is a tool set. We are not necessarily saying clients such as the ones you've cited, or companies such as the ones you've cited, are not driving. What we're saying is that the priority focus for driving companies is overweight, growth, transformation, headcount growth, and that like that, rather than cost cutting and probably reduction in some of the market activities you've identified. It's a tool set. I think it's a balance of the driving agenda and aspects of surviving. We've seen companies shed staff in order to reposition and rehire for growth. So I think there's interpretation there that, of course, contextual. I think the main thing to say is the characteristics of driving companies show through the gap, the reduced gap between saying what they want to do versus doing or executing on that. I think if you see companies like ABSA and KCB cutting costs, it's probably to reposition themselves for growth, which is
okay.
Characteristic of driving companies.
Yeah. So in essence, what you're saying is that could actually be a part of a process of transformation itself. Yeah. Okay, great. Maggie Frederick, she is saying that this is very enlightening and can even apply to her ministry. So Maggie runs an NGO that does work with kids, disadvantaged kids in the slums. So her question is, when you say digital transformation, are you talking about bringing in more equipment using social media? Can you explain, just unpack this a little more for Maggie?
Anthony, do you want to take that?
Yeah, so digital transformation is basically trying to digitize your channels. So for example, if you communicate with your stakeholders, maybe through letters and maybe physical meetings, when you talk about digital transformation, then how do you digitize those channels and make them the content more digital? And social media is, for example, one such example that you could give for that channel, and how you collect data. Maybe sometimes you collect information from your stakeholders through forms. You've got questionnaires that are all paper. When you talk about digital transformation, then how do you digitize that, so that even that process of collecting information now is all digital? Then when you get it there, all the data is electronic. Then you've got now the power to now analyze its real time, improved accuracy. Then most of your people can focus on more value-adding information, like maybe talking to the stakeholder to understand their real issues as opposed to collecting data. So that's what I think, in a very simple way, digital transformation means. It's just effectively digitizing all your manual, repetitive, automated process that can be automated, so that you can release your people to do the thinking and the soft issues that are important for your organization.
Okay, great. We have another question from Eugene Nize Yimana. The question is asking, what role is cultural intelligence play? What role does cultural intelligence play in Africa corporate leadership? I think it's a broad question, and it's something that Frank, you spent quite a bit of time just trying to touch on. But that aspect of cultural intelligence, how is this being embraced from an African leadership perspective, corporate leadership perspective?
Well, look, it's definitely a broad question, say, Max, and I would maybe just mention 3 things and focus again on the results of this. When we were having conversations about this, most CEOs did mention that, look, cultural, or rather culture shortcomings can imperil the broader transformation objectives. I would imagine that the intelligence around culture in that sense, whether actually in the African corporate leadership landscape or indeed anywhere else, is a key thing. CEOs confirm, look, deploying technology, hiring, these are the easier bit. The real challenge lies in the softer dimensions, of which culture is part and parcel. And so it's central, of course, to how you roll out transformation, how you shift culture, and more importantly, what we understand culture to be. I think we can have another session on culture and what it means, but I think, Eugene, the key point is, look, we are all learning, some better than others. Ultimately, I think my key point from the previous slide was, it may well be that the boards of the future will have a chief culture officer, and part of the role of that person might be to answer that question more deeply than I can.
All right. I have one more question. This struck me on actually the last slide that Anthony presented, vis-a-vis the stride around focusing, the focus on drivers for growth. So 26% of those who are interviewed, in terms of the characteristic of future enterprise, 26% actually identified the focusing on long-term value as a key characteristic and an important characteristic for the future enterprise. Yet, interestingly, if you look at the drivers for growth specific to the technology sector, only 17% of them identified long-term value as a key driver for growth. So I'm just wondering why would that be the case, especially for them who are right at the heart of the transformation itself, and I want to imagine that the way tech companies operate is really about long-term value. So would you care to give some perspectives on that as we round up?
Yes, I can very quickly comment on that, and Anthony, I'm sure also will have a view very quickly. But look, I think one thing that came through from this survey is that there is definitely significant work that remains to be done to reposition companies towards long-term value, but also that CEOs and indeed other stakeholders are unclear about the definition of long-term value in the first place, and therefore how to actually achieve it. So there's still work to be done. I think that then probably will answer the point, Maxwell, on why technology companies may not place long-term value up the list, as it were. My own view is that it's about definition or really understanding what is this thing that we're talking about long-term value. For us at TY, it's clear. It's the gap between saying versus doing, and then of course the focus on those 4 priorities: financial, customer, human, and I don't know whether Anthony might want to touch more on that, but
I think you've hit the nail on the head. This thing of long-term value, even our own business, is the time we are beginning to even measure our employees' performance linked to what we think are the long-term value pillars for our business, and it's come back into management science. Let me just put it that way. People who probably understand it best are people like Shell, guys who have been around for donkey years. Those organizations probably will get it faster than organizations that have been here shortest, like the tech companies that you're talking about. People like Shell and those companies that have got huge issues around reinventing their business model, and they have to survive, and they've pivoted their businesses multiple times, will probably appreciate it and run faster than those who have not been here longest, like most of the tech businesses like you speak about. But still new, it's come back. People are beginning to demand it. We think the capital markets will also increasingly start rewarding organizations that start making decisions that are long-term in nature with a better share price, as opposed to the other way around. And eventually probably it will be embedded in how small CEOs look at it and understand how to measure it and drive it.
All right. Okay, great. Thank you so much, Frank. Thank you, Anthony. Thank you to EY for partnering with us on this forum. I think it's been a very, very edifying session for me, and I'm sure for all those who have logged in this morning. Thank you to all members and our guests for participating and taking your time out this morning. We will share the slides as well as the report to everybody who's attended this forum. So look out for that via email later today. So with that, I want to bring the session to a close. Thank you again very much, and I do wish you a wonderful day ahead. Bye-bye.